Hey everyone, this is a portrait I did of Frida Kahlo a while back. I thought I would walk you through a little bit of my process. Frida was a Mexican artist who is known today for her vibrant self-portraits that were often filled with nature and florals, so I knew that I wanted some kind of floral background for my own painting of her. First I started with a layer of permanent green, phthalo green, and then I worked in some light yellow, hooker's green, and finally sap green. I used my Catalyst silicone tools to work in some mark making across the canvas before working in some areas of yellow ochre. Once that layer was dry, I made some abstract flowers using magenta and white, and then added some leaves to that using my sap green again. The flowers are painted starting with a darker color of magenta and working up each layer to a lighter color. Before the painting was completely dry, I sprayed it with water and then used a paper towel to dab away some of the color. Here I am applying one of my favorite golden colors, fluorescent pink. It was still a little too dark and I needed some more contrast, so I used a white Inksense crayon to randomly mark the canvas, and then I used my thick, heavy body golden titanium white to fill in some of those areas, and then use a silicone blade tool again to mark through those larger areas of color to break them down a little. My last addition to the background to warm it up was to add a wash of Golden's fluid yellow ochre, and then when that was dry I went in and created some vine shapes. When I'm painting a portrait of someone, I like to find a good reference photo and I'll draw a grid on that photo, and then I'll draw the same scale grid on my canvas using Crayola chalk, which is easily wiped away when I'm finished. I started sketching Frida out using willow charcoal, which is also easily washed away when you're finished painting. Okay, so now on to the painting of the actual portrait. I really recommend, it's a book by Walter Foster. It's 1500 color mixing recipes, and it has a whole section of skin tone recipes, and skin tone's very hard, so I often use this book for reference. For most of this portrait, though, I used a base recipe of raw sienna and cadmium light and mixed white into that for most of the skin color. And then for some of the warm shadows, I mixed in some burnt sienna, and then even some cerulean blue, some cadmium vermilion, and some viridian green into some of the other shadow areas. If you don't know that much about Frida, I definitely recommend the movie Frida starring Salma Hayek. It's one of my favorites, but Frida was in an accident as a child and she also suffered from polio, but after her accident she had suffered so many fractures of her spine and her shattered pelvis that she began to learn to paint while she was recovering in a full body cast, and she actually had 30 operations over her lifetime. Many of Frida's paintings depict her physical and emotional pain that she endured in her life. Of 143 of her paintings, 55 of them are self-portraits, and one of her most famous quotes was, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." As I finished up this painting, I wrote a quote from Frida on this canvas. It says, "Nothing is absolute, everything changes, everything moves, everything revolves, everything flies and goes away." Anyway, I'm super happy with how this portrait turned out, and I love that Frida is still celebrated today as a feminist icon. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. I do have prints of this in my Etsy shop if you're interested, and thanks for following along today.